doing the same thing. This has been really a remarkable 7 weeks for us. You're going to hear all about how we have managed the news side with Suzanne Marmion, who will be coming up shortly. But I want to say that to mobilize as many people at KPBS when you think that we have to be in the building, working on all the technology, doing the news, doing the programs, we actually ended up, we have about 85% of our 180 team working in some remote fashion, which I think is an incredible accomplishment. You'll hear more about how the news anchors and Evening Edition, how we are doing those programs now. But to think about pulling this off has been absolutely remarkable. And I would have to give a big shout out to our engineering and our IT team, who have done a remarkable job of getting all of this done. I haven't been to KPBS's building since March 7th, believe it or not. And as you can tell, I also haven't been to the barbershop in that time. But we have been busier than ever before. Some of the things that are non-news that we have added is that we partnered right away with the San Diego County Office of Education, the San Diego Unified School District, to develop a 12-hour learning program called At Home Learning, Where Children Matter. It airs on KPBS 2 Monday through Friday. It's a 12-hour block. The first part of the block is for pre-K to third graders. The second part of the block is 4th through 8. And the third part of the programming block is for 9 through 12 graders, as we try to make sure children had an opportunity to have a good curriculum. We've added many newsletters, and we are trying to make sure that we do our best to still engage you. So again, I welcome you to our very first group virtual Producers Club event. We've got a couple of more planning. I'll tell you about that in a little bit. But let's go ahead and move on. I'm pleased. Well, let me just, before I actually give Suzanne's official introduction. 11 years ago, I made a decision that KPBS needed to focus on serious local journalism other than just being on radio. Prior to 2009, all of our local news was just on KPBS radio. And I felt that it needed to be expanded and put on all platforms, including television, on demand, podcast, digital and social media, and kpbs.org. So we went through a complete reorganization and took our radio news team, which was doing top-notch work at that point, and we wanted to bring them in and say, you're going to have to take your stories and make sure they can get on television and on digital and social media. So we did a national search, and we came up with what has been the perfect person for us to take our news team from a group of about 15 in our newsroom in 2009, and now I believe we have 45. And so with that, let's continue with it. And I'd like to turn things over now to the Director of News and Editorial Strategy, who is Suzanne Marmion. You can see her on the screen. Suzanne is a veteran public broadcasting journalist and has taught investigative and health reporting to journalists in Africa, as well as digital multimedia storytelling at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism in New York City. She graduated summa cum laude from the University of California at Berkeley and has a master's degree from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. She's here to give you a glimpse into the changes that have been made at KPBS's newsroom and the vital work that our team has been providing during these, what I would say, historic times of the COVID-19, and how we have not only just tried to maintain the news, but we have grown the news. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Suzanne Marmion, our Director of News and Editorial Strategy. Suzanne, take it over. And you're not at the KPBS building either, right?
I am not. No, just my nice little virtual background here, so you don't see my cat on the bed behind me. Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for being here. I see we've got over 40 participants, and does my heart good to know that we are supported. We can't do what we do in the newsroom without the Producers Club and our members. So thanks again. And I hope you and your families are doing well. Like you, our news team has been adapting, including with many of us working from home, like Tom mentioned, and sometimes with some funny results, which is a little bit of what I'm going to share with you today. But first, on a serious note, my goal when that stay-at-home order, I could tell it was coming, was for us to work remotely, but to never miss a beat. Journalists are considered essential workers, and what could be more essential than helping our community to understand this important public safety information coming, what was going to be happening in our schools and our workplaces, and longer term with our economy. So we are now at more than 80% of the newsroom working from home, and this is how we ramped up to actually increase what we were doing for our news coverage, even with this strange technological, working with one hand behind your back of doing it remotely. We have our health reporter, Taryn Mento. She's asking questions of our public health officials and tracking our hospitals, and we're getting that into our reports every day. Our science and technology reporter, for instance, Shalina Chitlani, she's been covering local efforts around testing. Our education reporter, Joe Hong, has covered the incredible shift toward students learning from home and the challenges for parents. Yesterday, we actually had a student on who's autistic, and we know that kids with special needs were hit especially hard, not getting the services they used to have before. But in this case, this particular kid was kind of glad to not have the other kids around and to be feeling like he was getting more one-on-one attention. Amitha Sharma, our investigative reporter, has been digging deep into what's going on with nursing homes, care facilities. We knew this was going to be one of the most vulnerable parts of our society that was already understaffed even before all this started. Matt Hoffman's been out there covering lately some of the protests that we're seeing more and more of against the stay-at-home order. And our military reporter, Steve Walsh, he's been on the USS Theodore Roosevelt story. So that's just what some of the reporters have been doing. The rest of us, every day, we are covering the news conferences that are coming from the state at noon, the county at 2:30 p.m., the city at 4:30 p.m. We carry those live news conferences from the state during midday edition right now with Governor Newsom online every day and also on the radio, which means our midday team takes back over at 1 p.m. So for a while, midday edition is not on at midday. We're on at 1 p.m. in order to carry the governor. Weekends, we increased staff to include more radio newscasts. We now have a web team on duty from 6 a.m. till 8:30 p.m. and the news editors are on call 24/7. So that's what we've been doing. What our audience has been doing has been interesting. On radio, our audience is down a little bit right now. And this is because not as many people are driving to and from work. But on the flip side, what we are seeing is more people streaming online or using smart speakers. By the way, if you have a smart speaker, every morning you can ask it to play you the San Diego News Matters podcasts. It's got all that local coverage that I was just talking about. Plus, we're dropping in some special episodes just for the podcast called The Pandemic Pivot. And that's about how life is changing long-term in our region and sometimes for the better. If you're more of, I just want the live news, you can just say to your smart speaker, play KPBS to get the live stream. So our habits are having to change as we're not driving as much. We've been reaching the widest range of people that we can possibly do. For instance, we've stepped up doing Insta stories on Instagram, where we've been giving practical tips on facial coverings and the latest case numbers, which have been popular with younger people. And then we're going to go to some slides here. You can see a live blog that we started, which has been going gangbusters. This is where we're updating the news every day, almost in real time, digitally. Overall, we've seen a huge spike in web traffic as people are really hungry for reliable news. Hey, Valerie, are you able to get up the slides there? She may be having a little lag there. All right. Yeah, so this, we'll just scroll you through to a shot of what the live blog looks like. So there it is. It's actually at the top of our webpage. If you click on tracking the coronavirus, tracking COVID-19, you can get to that live blog. And it's just been, I mean, exponentially popular with people, because I think we're also hungry to know as fast as possible, you know, what's open today or what's changing. On this next slide, we've also been answering a lot of questions coming in from our audience, and we love it. So if you have questions, you know, we get everything about, you know, why cloth masks when they don't really stop the aerosols, and what we're doing is making this a resource-based, a fact-based set of answers to your questions, where we're having our journalists interview doctors and public officials instead of a lot of pretty crazy misinformation that you may have been seeing floating around online. Our TV audience, in this next slide, you'll see Maya Trabulsi, our anchor. The TV audience has gone way up along with our digital audience, and that's because obviously more people are at home and they're looking for news that they can trust. So Maya here is in fact in her living room. That's a screen behind her. If we go to this next slide, you can see that is her on-air light that her husband put up in the hallway. They have 2 small children, and the kids know that when mom is live on TV at 5 o'clock, then that red light is on in the hallway. Don't go running inside. In this next slide, you'll see we've even moved our producer for Evening Edition remotely. So this is producer Kim Swain, and what you can see there is her phone attached to the top of her laptop is showing what's happening live on air, and she's working underneath in the rows of the rundown, queuing up scripts and video. So I was telling you, the mayor of the city's been having news conferences every day at 4:30. So a lot of times announcements are coming down at 5:10, 5:15 while we're live on the air. So Kim is there and she's updating those scripts so that Maya, while she's live in her living room, can get that new information on before the end of the program. So you can imagine that when we do these sorts of things, sometimes things go wrong. So in this next slide, we've got actually just a little vignette. This is on audio of an unpaid member of the KPBS team who decided to sign off in this next interview. What you're going to hear is our arts and culture reporter, Beth Accomando, and in the early weeks, she was helping to answer pandemic-related questions. She is back now on the arts beat because we also see this as such an important time of challenge and transformation for artists and musicians. But here she is on KPBS Midday Edition Radio talking about some of our new online resources about the pandemic with host Mark Sauer.
Can you quickly remind us how people can submit questions and see other questions that we've answered?
Sure. So if you go to the KPBS website, there's a banner up at the top that you can click on. It's, I think, orange, and that'll take you to all of our coronavirus coverage. And then if you go to the, KPBS answers your coronavirus questions and scroll down to the bottom, there is a form you can fill out with any question you might have.
Well, thank you very much. I've been speaking with KPBS arts reporter Beth Accomando. She's been answering your corona. Shall we stop? Let me do that again.
I'm sorry, my dog is barking. Let me mute my mic.
Beth's dog making an appearance there, sounding like he was trying to sign off for her. We've got a thing going, it feels like, with dogs right now in this next case of, geez, what could go wrong with doing interviews from home? We were actually doing a story about dogs, so they were meant to be a part of it. But working with animals is almost as challenging as working with kids. Our reporter, Claire Trageser, you can just kind of see her at the top of the screen there. It's a little blurry right now, but that's her doing the interview. She's talking in the main part of the screen there to an animal rescuer, Melanie Murnani. And our story was about how people are fostering more animals as they're looking for quarantine company. So you'll see our reporter, Claire, in the Zoom window with her special guest star who comes in, Devin. That is her 2-year-old son. And the sound of the dogs in the interview was just too irresistible for Devin. And the dogs were quite a handful too for the animal rescuer, with Petunia knocking over her camera. So take a look.
For the community to know.
Come say hi. Look at these doggies. My son is here.
Oh, he's gonna like. Look at those doggies.
You see the doggies?
Yeah, there's you, and there's the doggies.
Trying to look over here. Look over right here. Oh yeah. Oh, she's giving you a kiss. She's giving you a kiss, huh?
Yeah.
And what is it?
Okay. I'll be back in a minute, okay? Yeah, you said hi. I'll come find you, okay? In a little bit. I'm almost done. Okay? Say bye-bye.
That was Devin, and he had to say hi. So that's some of the challenges of working from home. We'll take little breaks here and there to make room for our lives that carry on. And we are, of course, still going out into the field. Not everything is being done from home. In this next slide, you're going to see our reporter, Max Rivlin-Nadler, and he's at the border. In the early days of this, we had to make some makeshift boom poles, poles where we could basically allow for social distancing so we didn't make our sources feel uncomfortable and also to keep our team safe. So sometimes we've been taping our microphones to the end of a mic stand, getting a little ingenious. And so the video journalist here, her name is Andy Duclef, and she happens to, in her spare time, be a pretty brilliant animator. And you'll see this next slide. She photoshopped Max's boom pole into a broom pole to sort of poke fun at our attempts to be creative with being able to maintain our social distancing. So those were some of the lighter moments. We've also had some touching moments in this new era of coverage. In this next slide, you'll see our Metro reporter, Andrew Bowen, who got a special delivery from his mom. She actually sewed 40 masks for our team that is going out in the field, where we're still working to keep finding the people who are being affected by the pandemic. But the really moving part of the work that we've been doing is seeing how our community has been coming together in San Diego. For instance, we know that some distillers, some people in the alcohol industry in San Diego have switched from making gin and vodka to hand sanitizer. Matt Hoffman goes around with a bottle that he got from a story that he did there, and he assures us that it does in fact smell like vodka. We've seen neighbors who are, getting groceries for seniors. Nan Sturman from our program, A Growing Passion, has been bagging up seedlings and working with Kitchens for Good to be able to provide little plants to families that are in need to be able to grow their own food, and just giving those for free. So I'm going to leave it here with a minute or two for you to just feel some of the love that we've been seeing in our unbelievably resilient community and our children. These are the students of the San Marcos Unified School of Visual and Performing Arts, thanking the people in San Diego who have been working to keep us safe.
I would like to say thank you to all the doctors out there. I would like to thank everyone out there who are taking risks in their lives and saving our planet. I would like to thank the grocery store workers for risking their lives.
I would like to thank all the first responders because it is a tough time right now and they're working very hard to keep us safe.
Doctors and nurses for your hard work.
And I'm leaving it to Tom to speak first because I could never watch that video without getting emotional. So thank you.
Gee, thank you. I got a tear in my eye too. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Before we open it up to questions, though, I want to emphasize the heroic work you and your team have done, because not only did we have to keep the news up and go through this whole process of working at home and getting everyone to work at home, but we also had to deal with people's safety and their health. And I remember our Associate General Manager for Technology and Operations, Bruce Rogo, literally drove to every store he could possibly go to get wipes and cleaning solutions and things like that, and masks. And then we had to deal with a lot of our people that had children who no longer had childcare. And to do that, and then you had me who said, we want more news. We want you to add, and you've added more newscasts in the midday, a complete schedule of 12 hours of local news on Saturday and Sunday, and a real effort. So how have you handled all of that?
You know, it's sure, it's been exhausting, but I'm inspired every day by what I know the team is doing, and that everybody's putting in 110%. And really, we just feel the urgency of what's happening. Everything that we're dealing with is nothing compared to what's happening in our community right now. And that takes precedence over everything. So I really miss the team. You know, we are on a Zoom call every morning, so I get to see them, but it's not quite the same. But I have been hearing from them and seeing them absolutely galvanized to feel like, yeah, of course we're essential workers, and we want to do what we can, which in our case is to do research and sort out the fact from the fiction and tell the stories, and it's made them feel very, very energized.
Here's a question. I'm not sure if you can answer it, but it says, this is from Barbara Peterson. Would you address the issue of local medical centers and providers hemorrhaging money while keeping elective surgeries down and patients away in anticipation of the COVID-19 capacity? I know we've reported on it, but.
Yeah, we have. And we actually today we're doing more, because you saw, I think it was yesterday, the announcement of layoffs at Palomar, over 300 personnel, some of them nurses. And it's been real cognitive dissonance, I think, for the community to see what's happening here, because we've been prepared for a surge, and there certainly have been. There's been a steady increase in cases, and at this point, we haven't had as much of a surge as other states have. We took early action in California, and Californians, for the most part, have been really doing a good job of abiding by the rules of staying at home and not endangering their neighbors, especially since we can be asymptomatic. So interestingly, hospitals, in preparation for the surge, they canceled a lot of elective surgeries, and they switched as many things to telemedicine as they can. Physical therapy appointments aren't happening right now. And so they have had less business. I mean, they are ultimately, most of them, for profit. And so they are letting go or starting to lay off staff. So it's a very strange phenomenon, and we will be covering it. We've got a reporter on the story today to move it forward.
And I encourage all of you, if you have any questions, to please go ahead and type those in, and we'll try to get to many of them as possible. Suzanne, not only have you been working really well with keeping our team together, talk about how you've been collaborating with the other public media organizations in California.
Yeah, so just a few months ago, we created something called the California Newsroom. Working name was The Hub. And in partnership with NPR and the larger California stations like KQED in San Francisco, KPCC in LA, Capital Public Radio in Sacramento, we really have started working together more like a network. So public media is interesting because we're really all independent, community owned or based organizations. We're not like traditional commercial television networks, for instance, where it's truly a one corporate owned network. And the upside of that is our independence, and that we are really representing our communities. The downside is, we didn't necessarily have a built-in infrastructure for working together. So we've been wanting to do this for a while. It takes some resources, collaboration, regular calls, learning how to share our editorial plans for the day, and then sharing those stories so we don't duplicate efforts, which we really don't want to do. I mean, it's member money, so we want to be as efficient as possible. And one way this newer collaboration has really come into its own early on was we realized right at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, we were going to have a live news conference from Sacramento every day. And this is not something we had a resource necessarily to take. We don't have like a satellite or because we're not a network. And so Capitol Public Radio in Sacramento stepped right up and helped set up the infrastructure with the governor's office. And then we host the governor live and the other officials. You can't just sort of let him pop on the air. You have to explain to people what's happening and then maybe end it with some questions and answers with some analysis. And so that's quite a burden to do a live 1 hour show like that every day. And we've shared it amongst the newsrooms. So we here in San Diego, I think it was last Friday, we hosted the live press conference coming from Sacramento. And we hear that on audio. We have to go online on the Facebook feed, or Gavin Newsom likes to use Twitter, so we can see when he's actually walking up to the podium. He's not always as punctual as you might like. So we've had to MacGyver it a little bit, but that's one example of how without the California newsroom in place, we wouldn't have been able to have this hosted live coverage every day of the governor from Sacramento.
Very good. And again, if you have a question for Suzanne, please go ahead and add it to the box. Suzanne, over the years you've been at KPBS, you've really helped to develop what we called an emergency broadcast plan when there is something. In the past, we focused on the wildfires and how we mobilize our team. And always we could kind of predict when there would be some sort of an end to that. I don't know if we have that. So what has been your thoughts on how do we worry about today, tomorrow, and a week from now when we really don't know what's going to be happening?
Yeah, Tom, I got distracted by the question that popped into the box. Do you have
yes, I saw that too.
That I should ingest?
Do you have a recommended disinfectant that I should ingest? I think I know who that came from.
No,
anyway, I'm trying to be serious, Mr. Burnett.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Ask me again, Tom. I'm sorry.
Okay. The question really is that during the previous emergencies that we've had, like fires that last 3, 4, 5 days, we always would start. We go full bore. We have everybody in place. But now we don't know what's going on with this one here. So we're 7 weeks into this thing. So what keeps you up at night thinking about how am I going to keep this? How do I sustain it? Is this now kind of because we've talked about it. We're kind of normal now in terms of our reporting, but it's still a stretch on our whole team.
Yeah, no, it's a stretch. And I know that for some folks, it is really taking a toll. So I do worry about burnout with the team. With journalists in particular, somewhat like frontline workers in medical scenarios. Some people can get a little PTSD you go out and you're meeting with people who are going through a lot, and it's hard not to absorb that, because we want to be empathetic. We want to tell those stories. I do worry about the team in the long haul, but what I can do about that is try to staff us as sustainably as possible. We've actually had help at the station from people who aren't normally in the newsroom, who've been, Julia Dixon-Evans. She's a brilliant arts writer. She's helping us on the weekends right now cover those web shifts. Turns out she's a great journalist too with hard news. So we appreciate that support that we've been getting. Mm-hmm. I'm always trying to think 2 steps ahead with where we need to be. For instance, facial coverings mandatory starting Friday. So I've been shopping online for a while now for facial coverings before that, because I figured that's what would be next. And I want to make sure that we're equipping our team to be as safe as possible. And most of all, we get it that this is not going to be a quick thing. We're looking at, we heard yesterday from the governor, many weeks in front of us before the next phase of possible reopenings. School may be starting back in July. That's going to be a huge adjustment if that's what happens. The economy, the shoe hasn't entirely dropped yet on how this is going to affect our businesses in San Diego. And people, Friday is the rent is due. So we're working on a story about how people are going to be managing to pay the rent. So long-term impact, that means we have to just think strategically about how we can keep maintaining our commitment to being there and to covering this news.
Bonnie Scott asked a question. It's actually two parts, and I think probably I'll take this one. Is, do I have a plan to gradually get ourselves back into a swing? We're going to take it day to day because we just don't know what that's going to happen. We have talked about bringing people back slowly. We are actually rethinking our seating chart right now at KPBS to make sure that our desks are a little farther apart, and we're working on that. So we might continue some sort of teleworking so we can make sure people feel safe as we are coming back into the building. And there was another part of the question that dealt with organizations are feeling it. How is KPBS dealing with the finances, and what is our financial implication? I'll be very honest with all of you. We have seen a big drop in our corporate business support as underwriters. Businesses are shutting down, so they have backed off. And we've also seen some of the members have to cancel their membership, and people have called in, canceled their membership, but have been very apologetic, but we understand. So we are making some expense reductions right now. It's too early to know exactly how all of these things will end up, but we're working on them the best we can. Let's see here. We have one. Thank you for your great presentation, Suzanne. Your educational background at Berkeley and Columbia Grad School is exactly the same as my son, Dan Evans. He's now a journalism professor at FIU. I think it would be cool to get you two in contact. Well, that's very cool. I think Suzanne's easy to get a hold of. So
yeah, I'd love to be in contact. And Tom, that's something we should talk about. It just makes me think of,
Go ahead.
We can't really do tours anymore, but this was a great way we got to meet people coming into the station. But we're behind the scenes today, right, Tom? We're trying out a virtual tour with somebody who had, I think it was like Take His Son to Work Day.
Actually, we did it this morning.
Yeah, how did it go?
Yeah, it went pretty well. It went well. One of our staff members, we tested it and did it to a small group of his kids' class, and I thought it went pretty well. But we're touring an empty building, just like every other building and businesses here. Here's another one from Marianne Lyman-Hager. What are your thoughts on covering the entire airing live of the Presidential Task Force briefings? Some people feel that when there is misleading information, coverage could be counterproductive and cause harm. All I can say is we'll turn this one over to Suzanne, but I know we have discussed this quite a bit.
We have. I mean, nobody wants to be censoring one of our elected officials. And so at the same time, we do realize that misinformation gets put out there. So what we're doing with the White House briefings, NPR handles those from Washington, and based on the urgency of the news, we may very well carry them live. In which case, you know, there's always analysis at the end. You might hear Scott Horsley, you know, who used to be at KPBS. Actually, it's not Scott anymore, but when he was in the White House. But you'll hear one of the NPR reporters come in afterward and fact check. You know, they'll set the record straight on some of what was said. But for the most part these days, actually, we're not carrying the presidential briefings live. on KPBS. We are taking the news that comes out of them, and it gives them some time for the journalists to package it up, to get response, to fact check or go to a scientist if need be, to put the president's comments in context. That's not to say we would never carry him live. It just depends on the occasion. But at this point, we are not carrying them live.
Very good. I think we said we were going to go till about 1:15, and I believe that's the time we have. All I can say is thank you all very much for your support. Thank you, Suzanne, and keep up the great work. The team has done a tremendous job. And I want to make one point too. Not only has our TV audience up, our digital audience is up. I do want to make a point. Our radio audience is slightly down, and at first I was kind of concerned about that, but it makes perfect sense because radio is a commute drive time effort, and so that's down. But in terms of our Facebook posts that your news team has been doing, we're the #1 in the country, all PBS stations, and we're #2 in the NPR stations in terms of our connection on all those things.
And
So,
I think that's kudos to San Diego too. What that is measuring, you guys, is engagement. So people are absolutely commenting. They're chiming in with advice or their opinions about some of what we're seeing in the news. So I've always been so excited living in San Diego with what a passionate and dedicated and engaged audience we have here in San Diego.
yes. And again, thank you very much, Suzanne Marmion. I also want to mention that we've got 2 more Producers Club virtual events coming up shortly in May. We are going to, I think it's May 14th. We are going to do at 12:30 p.m. A virtual event with NPR's co-host of All Things Considered, Ari Shapiro. And so he's going to talk a little bit about what it's been for him. And I know when he's on the air in the afternoon, he says from my home studio. So we know he's sheltering in. And then in June, on June 19th, we'll have another Producers Club virtual event with the executive producer of PBS's show Nature, Fred Kaufman. And I know Fred, I've met him a couple of times. I've been to some of his events. He brings some clips and it's a fabulous event. So I hope that you'll be able to join us as we continue engaging in the virtual arena. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for your support. Thank you to Suzanne. And I also want to give a shout out to Valerie Bradley, Caitlin Bergen, and Claudine Casillas, our staff members that have put this whole thing together. Thank you, ladies, very much. And for that, there's a little button that says leave meeting. And I guess that's how we sign off here.